The graveyard silence of Underwood Road was shattered by the screaming siren of an ambulance as it raced down the road in the wee hours of the morning. The ambulance came to a stop in front of the Hingston's butcher shop. Paramedics rushed to the flat above the butcher shop, but they were too late. 83-year-old Eric Hingston lay dead, a deep wound to his neck. The only other occupant was Eric's terrified and confused wife, 81-year-old Audrey Hingston. Audrey told police that intruders had broken into their flat and killed Eric, who must have tried to grapple with them. Thus was launched an extensive and expensive police investigation to identify the murderers, when the murderer was so close to home. This is the story of Audrey Hingston and the murder of her husband, Eric Hingston.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. Anxiety, filling up every space, no privacy, and silently, it could build and build until you finally see, whoa, it's taking over, damn no closure, moving close.
Hi and welcome to my channel. I hope that you are doing well and loving life. As for me, I'm busy making these videos for you. Just for you. As I'm discussing murder, and that too of an elderly man, some may find the content disturbing. Viewer discretion is therefore advised. We are traveling to Devon, England for today's case. The county of Devon is in the southwest of England. It is scenic in its natural beauty, covered with moors, hills, valleys and lofty cliffs. An interesting fact is that it is the only English county with two separate coastlines, the English Channel to the south and the Bristol Channel and the Irish Sea to the north. Another interesting fact is that both Sir Walter Raleigh and Agatha Christie were both born in Devon, and of course the place is famous for its Devonshire cream and its Jack Russell dog, which was first bred in Devon for hunting. Also, it is apparently quite possible that the famous Cornish pasty was actually invented in Devon and copied by its neighbour Cornwall. Our story takes place in the port city of Plymouth, which is in the south of Devon and is the largest city in Devon. This is where Eric Hingston was murdered. Let's now unpack the murder of Eric Hingston. Audrey and Eric Hingston, the main characters in our true story, were from Plympton, St. Maurice, one of the villages that make up the city of Plymouth. Eric was 83 years old when he died. Some reports say that he was 85. Anyway, he was a war veteran who obtained his pilot's license when he was 18 years old and served in the RAF, that is the Royal Air Force, during the Second World War as a pilot in Winston Churchill's Special Operations Executive, known as the SOE. As an interesting historical aside, the SOE was a secret British World War II organization formed in July 1940, soon after the fall of France to Nazi Germany. SOE agents were tasked with espionage, sabotage and helping local resistance movements in enemy territory. As such, Eric Hingston flew secret agents behind enemy lines in occupied France. It is said that Eric flew a two-seater aircraft at low level into rural areas using only a compass to guide him. I don't know what that means, but apparently that's quite impressive. The man was a patriot and a war hero. After the war, Eric set up a butcher's shop and carried on business as a butcher in Underwood Road, Plympton, St. Maurice. He married his first wife Jean in 1950 and had two children with her, James and Sally. James is married to a woman also called Sally, and Eric's daughter Sally is married to her husband named Ivor. I understand that's how it's pronounced in England, Ivor and not Ivor. Eric was also a grandfather. His wife Jean died in 1982 when Eric was in his early 60s. He must have become very lonely, and perhaps he was looking for companionship, which he found in a woman named Audrey. I think that her married name was Hume. Audrey was a couple of years younger than Eric. She was a widow, her husband having died of a heart attack. She had at least one child, a son named Peter Hume, who, at the time of this story, was a retired detective sergeant. Audrey was also a grandmother. As an aside, when researching this case, I read that a certain Peter Hume, a detective sergeant from Plymouth, who had retired from the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, had written a book about the death of a young policeman in Plymouth in the 1870s. I wonder if he is Audrey's son. Anyway, Eric and Audrey were not strangers. They had known each other when they were both married to their respective spouses. And they had a platonic friendship. So Eric and Audrey, the two lonely hearts, decided to get married. By Audrey's account also, they married for companionship. At the time that Eric married Audrey, he had been a widower for 18 months. One report says that it was 6 months, so I'm not sure. Anyway, his family thought that they were marrying in haste. Funny how the tables are turned, isn't it? Anyway, after they married, they lived in a flat above the butcher's shop. The couple, however, turned out to be loving and caring and enjoyed their life together. The key word here is enjoyed. I couldn't find any pictures of Audrey before 2003. By 2003, Audrey was a petite, sweet old lady with curly silver hair that was well groomed, and she was always apparently immaculate. She had light brown eyes and wore glasses with big frames. She looked every inch like a sweet old lady. To me, I would imagine Agatha Christie's Miss Marple looking just like her. Anyway, to continue with the story, Eric, in due course, retired from the butchery business, which was actually taken over by his son James. Eric and Audrey continued to live in the flat upstairs the butcher shop. It is said that they had a happy marriage and were looking forward to growing old together. They also had an active social life. They were hardly home. They were a sociable couple and they loved eating out. They went out sightseeing in their car and they went abroad on holidays. They were also active in the community. Everyone in the village knew and liked the couple. Eric and Audrey were living out their retirement by generally having a good time. So be it, good for them. They had worked hard, raised families, and now was the time to relax and enjoy. But with twilight years comes sickness. Growing older is oftentimes not fun, especially for a couple who were enjoying their life like Eric and Audrey was. Eric's health started to deteriorate when he was 80 years old. He was already an asthmatic and his asthma grew worse. Then he developed heart problems as well. Around the time of his death, he was recovering from a hip replacement and had a catheter fixed. Oh, it's raining. He could only walk with the aid of walking sticks. He also had prostate problems and was scheduled to have a prostate operation not long before his death. And Audrey, on the other hand, was a spry old lady who was in good health. It was said that she wouldn't think twice about walking to town if she missed the bus. By 2003, Eric was frail and in declining health. Because of Eric's failing health, when the sprightly Audrey was in her early 80s, she found herself as Eric's full-time caregiver and the domestic situation changed drastically. They were no longer going out anymore. The car had to be sold, and their once outgoing and active lifestyle came to a halt. The couple were now stuck at home, surrounded by sickness, doctors, and medicines. I imagine the only outings for Audrey would have been grocery shopping and doctor's visits. Not quite what she had expected when she took her wedding vows for the second time. But they trudged on for some time. In the wee hours of the morning on Friday, the 29th of August 2003, the peace and quiet of Underwood Road was broken by the sound of emergency services. They were responding to a 999 call made by Audrey at 3:44 a.m. Audrey told the 999 dispatcher that their flat had been broken into by burglars and Eric had been attacked, and she thinks that he is dead. When paramedics arrived, they saw Eric lying on the bedroom floor with a neck wound. It appeared as if he had been stabbed. There was not much blood at the scene. The paramedics detected a pulse, and so they started to use a defibrillator to get his heart back to normal rhythm. Unfortunately, the pulse reading was wrong because Eric wore a pacemaker. Apparently, pacemakers give a false pulse reading even after the heart stops. Tragically, Eric was declared dead on arrival at the Derryford Hospital in Plymouth. Eric was laid to rest on the 3rd of December 2003 after a funeral service at the St. Mary's Church in Plimpton. More than 100 mourners comprising Eric's family, friends and neighbors gathered at the church to pay their last respects. Eric is interred in St. Mary's Churchyard in Plimpton, St. Maurice. A post-mortem later determined that Eric was killed with a long and sharp blade that was thrust past his collarbone and into his lung, puncturing it. It must have been painful. Poor man. Investigating police officer was Detective Chief Inspector Tony Carney. When he arrived at the flat, he saw a frightened, upset and shocked Audrey. She was also crying, confused and incoherent. Admittedly, it must have been very traumatic for her, and the police were very sympathetic. They were sympathetic to her, as were the residents of Plimpton St. Maurice. Can you imagine this poor lady going through such a traumatic incident? Can you? Audrey told DCI Carney that 2 burglars had broken into their home and murdered Eric. DCI Carney said that the scene looked like a typical burglary scene. The flat had been ransacked. Drawers were open and clothes strewn all about. Audrey told DCI Carney that she was sleeping in another room when she heard a scuffle, and she got up to investigate. She saw 2 young men who fled through the open window when they saw her. She then saw her husband lying on the floor looking ashen, and so she called 999. Police noticed that the bedroom window was open. Apparently, Eric had asthma, and therefore he slept with the window open to ease his breathing. Police recovered a garbage bag with jewelry stolen from the flat by the side of the open window. The burglars had fled without their loot when they were surprised by Audrey. It looked like the burglars entered and escaped through the open window that opened on to a flat roof. The police figured that the burglars would have used a ladder to climb onto the flat roof and entered the bedroom through the open window. Audrey volunteered her opinion. According to her, Eric would have got up and confronted the burglars and got killed. Apparently, Eric Hingston was the type of man who would have had a go at the burglars. This is what his family reportedly said. So Audrey was probably right, surmising as she did. Now, unfortunately for the murderous duo, Audrey actually remembered what they looked like. She gave the police a detailed description of the murderers. It was the next day that she did it. According to her, one was tall, 6 feet 1 inch, wore a deerstalker like Sherlock Holmes. He also wore white trousers. The other one apparently was shorter, about 5 foot 8 inches, and he was stocky. And according to one report, she said that he was wearing a headgear that looked like a tea cozy. Furthermore, fortunately for the police, she also told them that she has seen the men around the village. A breakthrough in the case just as the case had started. Amazing, right? Now, burglaries were rare in Plimpton St. Maurice, and a burglary ending in murder was unheard of. DCI Carney said it was a tragedy that this should happen to an elderly couple who were enjoying their retirement. He also said that it was one of the worst crimes that he had seen in his career. Wow. A police investigation was soon launched to identify and apprehend the murderers based on the precise descriptions given by Audrey. As you can imagine, the murder shocked the residents of this peaceful and quiet English village. They couldn't fathom that a crime like this happening in their own village. So what happened was bound to happen. The residents became terrified of break-ins, and it was reported that some were frightened even to sleep. The police had to utilize time and money to set up kiosks all over the village where people could go and talk to detectives for assurance that they were safe. Police also visited children in schools to reassure them. The police were kept busy over and above tracking down the murderers. Then, Audrey unexpectedly agreed to make a televised appeal to the public, asking for help with any information that would apprehend the murderers. Her emotional plea was televised on September the 1st of 2003. Audrey, who was living then with her son Peter, appeared on the screen. It must have pulled at everyone's heartstrings to see a prim and proper-looking little old lady wearing black and leaning for support on her son, making a tearful plea for help to catch the murderers. I will read out her words here. During the early hours of Friday morning, 2 men came into my house and ruined my life. My husband Eric did not deserve this. As a frail man, any resistance he put up could easily have been overcome by these 2 young men. There was no need for them to go to the lengths they did. Somebody somewhere knows who did this. I asked them to contact the police. If you have any information at all, please pass it to the police. When her son Peter, who was 56 at the time of the murder, was interviewed, he said that his mother was devastated and traumatized. The incident had ruined his mother, who had become paralyzed with fear. Experiencing such horror would have been traumatic even for a young person, let alone a frail 81-year-old grandmother. Everyone was very, very sympathetic. Audrey's description of the perpetrators were released to the media, and the description fitted 2 people who were usually seen in the area. What a relief that was for the residents. When the men in question realized that they had been described as the murderers, they quickly went to the police. So, case solved. Right? Wrong. Far from it. The police had to rule them out as suspects because they both had strong alibis. There was no way that they could be the murderers. So who could the murderers be? The police were back to square one and had to continue with their investigations that would eventually take 5 weeks, cost the constabulary £160,000 and utilize police manpower for a total of 481 hours, making house inquiries and taking down 800 statements. Now the days were passing and the police, despite vigorously pursuing the case, were not making any headway. The murder made national news. Crime Stoppers UK also got involved. Crime Stoppers UK is an independent charity which receives anonymous calls reporting crime or providing information about crimes that Crime Stoppers then pass on to the police. In Eric Hingston's case, Crime Stoppers offered a reward of £10,000 for information that would lead to the arrest of the murderers. There was one report that said that the reward offered was £14,000. Whatever the amount was, nothing came out of it. Nada. Zilch. Forensic search did not turn up any foreign fingerprints and no foreign DNA was recovered. The police even thought that the paramedics might have contaminated the scene when they were defibrillating Eric. Their uniforms were obtained and checked, but no foreign DNA or any forensic evidence turned up. The only fingerprints and DNA evidence found were those of Audrey's. There were also no glove marks found. Things were not making any sense because there was no evidence whatsoever of a break-in or a bungled burglary. The police then decided to do a second search of the Hingston flat. That's when they found a 7-inch serrated knife with traces of blood on it, stashed away on the side of a cutlery drawer. It was a knife that belonged to the Hingstons. Forensics also testified the blood on the knife as belonging to Eric. The police now had the murder weapon. There were fingerprints on the knife and they were Audrey's. The poor police were by now terribly confused. Nothing made sense. What might have made perfect sense simply didn't enter their wildest thoughts. Such is the perception of little old grandmothers. Then, in the midst of all that was happening, Audrey made a surprising admission. She said that she had lied about the home invasion because what really happened was that Eric committed suicide. He apparently stabbed himself in the shoulder. Poor, terrified Audrey wanted to save his family from the embarrassment of that, and so she lied that he was killed by intruders to cover up the fact that he killed himself. The police were not convinced by Audrey's story of suicide, and with further inquiries they discovered that just 2 weeks before Eric's murder, Audrey had taken the murder weapon down to the butcher's shop and asked her stepson James to sharpen the knife for her. Now finally, the police were becoming suspicious of Audrey. Then something dramatic happened while all this was going on. Audrey tried to kill herself by swallowing sleeping pills, and she left behind a suicide note. The note said that she couldn't live without her Eric, and it contained a plea for the murderers who ruined her life to be caught. Now, the police speculated whether Audrey really wanted to kill herself because she couldn't live without her beloved Eric, or because she was looking for public sympathy. The tide slowly started turning. When Audrey was in hospital after her suicide attempt, she was visited by some social welfare people who were surprised that for a grieving widow, she showed no grief. This was quite unlike the grief she had displayed during the early days of the murder. The social workers gave police this snippet of information. On top of that, Audrey's own family thought that she was holding something back. The police decided to pursue the suspicions of Audrey. They had no choice, you see. Nothing else made sense, and the police were getting nowhere. The residents were probably getting more and more panicked as the days went by without any kind of resolution. Confronted with all the information that was available to them, the police had no choice but to look at the only other person present in the flat that night. Audrey Hingston. Was Audrey a husband killer? To be sure, the police conducted an experiment. They reconstructed the break-in by asking two very fit police officers to enter the flat through the open window to see if they could do it without leaving any evidence behind on the window or surfaces around it. Guess what? They couldn't. The police were now closing in on Audrey. The suspicions were further confirmed when a driver delivering vegetables around the butcher's at about 2 a.m. on that night told police that he heard sounds of someone groaning as if in pain coming from an open upstairs window of the butcher's shop. Added to that, the post-mortem results placed the death of Eric much earlier than 3:45 a.m. or thereabouts, as reported by Audrey. It actually placed the murder at about 2 hours before Audrey dialed 999. The net was closing in on Audrey, who was in hospital after her suicide attempt. On the 7th of October 2003, Audrey was arrested as soon as she was discharged from hospital. Her arrest sent shock waves through the community, as you can well imagine. Hey, police, are you kidding? Everyone was skeptical. Surely the police are wrong, not sweet little old Audrey. On top of that, Audrey was saying nothing different. She still maintained her version of events. What the police really needed was a confession, but none was forthcoming. I can see why they needed a confession. It would save an arduous trial, not only for the police, but also for 81-year-old Audrey, for whom a trial would be quite traumatic. Also, imagine the public's backlash against the police if they were wrong. This case had attracted national attention. I'm sure that the police were highly stressed. A confession would be God sent. And confess she did. Her son Peter Hume, who was a retired detective sergeant, asked Audrey to come clean when he visited her in custody. You remember how the family thought that she was holding something back? Audrey then confessed and told Peter that she killed Eric because she was fed up looking after him. Her exact words were, "Okay, I killed him. I've had enough. I could not take any more of his illness and having to care for him." So she finally came clean after wasting 5 weeks of police time and public funds. The truth was out. She stabbed him at about 1:45 a.m. that night and spent the next couple of hours ransacking the room to buttress her story that they had a home invasion. She even took some of her belongings, including some jewelry, and put them in a bin bag and left it near the open window. It is thought that she was busy staging the burglary while poor Eric was in the throes of death. It must have been his groans or maybe his last labored breaths that the vegetable delivery man heard. Audrey went about covering her tracks as Eric lay dying in pain. Audrey was charged with Eric's murder on the 8th of October 2003 and she remained in custody until her trial on the 14th of March 2004. Now, why did she do it? Audrey murdered Eric because she didn't want to look after a sick man anymore. She had had enough of being his caregiver. It frustrated and depressed her because what she signed up for was a lifetime, or what was remaining of it, of fun. She missed their days of overseas travel, driving out to beauty spots for sightseeing, enjoying pub lunches, and getting together with friends for social activities. Audrey hated that the good life was over. The prosecutor at her trial said that Audrey resented the fact that Eric's condition affected her way of life. She must have resented it because she was still healthy but had to live the same life as her infirm husband. The change in her lifestyle distressed and depressed her, and she was in fact seeing a psychiatrist a couple of months before Eric's death. Apparently, she wrote to Eric's doctor saying that if he tells her there is something else wrong with Eric, she will emigrate. That is probably said in half jest, but she probably wished that she could just take off, just vanish, poof. On the 14th of March 2004, Audrey attended the Crown Court at Plymouth, and she was allowed to plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. Diminished responsibility is a partial defense to murder that was legislated by the English Parliament after the tragic case of 28-year-old Ruth Ellis, who murdered her lover and was the last woman to be hanged in England. It allows the charge of murder to be reduced to manslaughter. Nowadays, this plea is available to battered women who kill their partners because of the extreme emotional and stressful state of mind that they are in. A conviction of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility means that the court accepted that Audrey's ability to understand the nature of her conduct or form a rational judgment and or exercise self-control was substantially impaired when she killed Eric. The judge relied on psychiatric reports on Audrey. As you will recall, she had been seeing a doctor for depression. The reports apparently said that she was suffering from depression and was not responsible for her actions. We are not privy to those reports, but they must have convinced the judge to accept Audrey's plea of diminished responsibility. Apart from the psychiatric reports, it was said that the judge was most probably sympathetic to her circumstances, where she became a full-time sole caregiver when she was in her late 70s. While the judge accepted her plea, she also described Audrey's actions as wicked and calculated, and that she covered her tracks in a convincing manner. Although the judge talked about Audrey's wickedness, the judge accepted what she described as Audrey's solitary suffering, and that no one knew the extent of her solitary suffering. In any event, the judge deemed it appropriate that Audrey's actions did deserve a sentence of punishment. She sentenced Audrey to 2 years. 2 years for taking a life. It was thought that she received this light sentence because of her age, history of depression, and that she did not pose a threat to anybody. The prosecution didn't appeal the sentence. At that time, many people thought that her sentence was not appropriate. Eric's family, for one, thought it was unfair. His daughter-in-law said that the sentence was a farce and asked the question that if Audrey could do what she did when she was unprovoked, what would she do when she was in fact provoked? The family felt angry, disappointed, and betrayed. DCI Carney said that Audrey played the role of a grieving widow very well. Another detective who worked the case was of the opinion that the justice system failed Eric Hingston. A police officer said that Audrey planned Eric's murder meticulously and that she was a two-faced sneak who posed as a helpless little old woman. The police must have felt cheated. She really hoodwinked them. When they had to release the men she tried to implicate, they made excuses for her, saying that perhaps she had seen them in the village earlier, and in her terrified and confused mind, she mistakenly connected the two incidents. It is also thought that one of the reasons that Audrey got such a light sentence was because of an impact statement made by the Hingston family. Passing sentence, Mrs. Justice Hallett said, "All the evidence indicate you and Eric were a devoted couple, and his son described the way you looked after him as brilliant. brilliant until that fatal night. However, this impact statement was given before Audrey confessed. The Hingston family did not have a chance to change the impact statement because they didn't know when Audrey's court date was. So they didn't attend court on the 14th of March 2004 when she was sentenced. I must say that Providence really favored our murderous granny. The perceived unfairness of her sentence prompted Conservative MP Gary Streeter, a Devon MP, to request the Attorney General to review Audrey's sentence in October 2004. The Attorney General, however, declined to refer the matter to the Court of Appeal. After looking at all the guidelines, the Attorney General was of the opinion that the Court of Appeal would not increase her sentence. There was thus a finality in the judgment, and Audrey was safe from further judicial proceedings. Although she was sentenced to 2 years, Audrey only served 1 year. Her murder earned her the notoriety of being the UK's oldest woman ever to be jailed. While she was in prison, she was allowed visits from her family and was even given a room with a shower and the privilege of locking her door at night. Like I said, Providence really favored her. She was released from prison in October 2004, and one of the conditions of her release was that she was not to go anywhere near the Hingston family until 2005. Audrey lived for another 12 years, dying at the ripe old age of 94. I was surprised that she was allowed to plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. I know that the judge relied on psychiatric reports that must have persuaded her to be lenient in accepting Audrey's plea and giving her a light sentence. I'm sure that the judge had good reasons because we are not privy to the psychiatric reports and also the reasoning behind her judgment. But I just cannot understand her plea of diminished responsibility when I consider the actions that she took, because by the looks of it, the murder was planned. It was premeditated. Her actions prior to and after the murder makes me think that she is a meticulous, calculating and scheming killer. Asking a son, to sharpen the knife that would end his father's life is heartless. And to think that this old lady pushed the entire length of the 7-inch knife down, causing Eric's lung to collapse, sends shivers through me. Further, trying to implicate 2 innocent young men for her crime shows that she has absolutely no conscience. She covered her tracks, and whenever the police became suspicious, she changed tack and tried something new to deflect attention from her. That would have taken some planning. Those of us who have been caregivers know how difficult, frustrating and exhausting it is. We get it, especially when you are a senior citizen yourself. We can empathize. But how many of us will kill because of it? Why didn't Audrey ask for help? They were not alone in the world. His son was just downstairs, for crying out aloud. Instead of asking the son to sharpen the knife for her, she should have just said, "Hey Jimmy, it's getting difficult. I can't cope. I need help with your dad." Eric had 2 children who had spouses, and she had at least one. Surely they would have found a solution together collectively. But she didn't do anything. Perhaps it was because after nearly 2 years, he could no longer give her the life that she became accustomed to, and he became a burden. And this change in her situation changed her fondness for Eric into hatred. Hatred can easily lead to murder. What Audrey said in her fake emotional plea to the public on the 1st of September was true. Eric did not deserve to die. He was a war hero, a patriot, a man who undertook dangerous missions for his country, a father and grandfather about whom nothing negative had ever been said. In fact, his stepson Peter Hume said that Eric was a true gentleman who doted on his mother and was also good to him. Eric definitely didn't deserve to be killed in a place where he should have felt the safest and with someone he should have felt safe with. Her action, I think, was the ultimate betrayal, not to mention damage to two families. She left the Hingston family with the horror of having to live with the fact that Eric was brutally killed. As for her own family, she left behind a shameful legacy and an embarrassing one for Peter Hume, who was once a detective sergeant with the same constabulary. That's it from me now. Thank you for your time and attention. If you like this video, please subscribe and click on the notification bell. I'll see you again in my next video. Until then, take care, be vigilant, and be kind. Bye.